Do you have any questions for me? This is the most asked question. At the end of the interview, the interviewer always asks the resident or fellow. Most people don't even know that this is a chance to evaluate you during your interviews. We get very excited or we get very exhausted at the end of interviews that when they ask us, do you have any questions? Most of us, we say something like, oh no, thank you. You've already answered my question. But that, my friend, is wrong. Some programs actually have in their evaluation sheet to evaluate you during the interviews, they have that check mark to say, this resident asked intuitive questions, or this applicant asks thoughtful questions. It's actually part of some of programs checklist. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is what we're going to be talking about today. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to ask very personalized questions every single time. The kind of questions that will blow the mind of your interviewer, that will make them know that you prepared. Also, we're going to be talking about how you're going to research programs in under 20 minutes to ensure that you don't ask questions that will piss them off. And before making this video, I actually did some research and I found out that program directors actually are very repulsed by some specific questions that I'm going to put on the screen, questions that are thought to be red flags. So you don't want to be in that category of people asking questions that hurts your chances. So get a pen, get a paper, let's get to it. Now the first question is, why are your questions important? Now most people don't know this. The questions that you ask are actually a reflection of who you are. They're a reflection of what you care about, and they are also a reflection of the things that you have paid attention to before coming to the program or while the program was presenting to you. This means that when you ask a question, there's a tendency for us to make assumptions of the kind of resident you will be, the kind of person, the things that you look out for. And so that is why it matters. It gives people a formed opinion of you. We think that when you come to the program for interviews, you have all these answers that you've already made up, right? But your questions themselves, people don't necessarily think too hard about the questions they want to ask. That is where we can find out for real who you are. Your questions, they assess your preparedness. That's the first thing. Secondly, program directors are able to assess your judgment on the things that you are saying. Is this person mature? Is this person nuanced? Does this person understand emotional intelligence? They can assess that from the questions you ask. Additionally, they can also assess how you understand the residency structure. Let me give you an example. If somebody's asking about, what metrics do you guys use to give the PGY1s autonomy? It clearly tells me that you don't really understand the ACGME rules, that autonomy is based on graded and feedback from attendings. It's standard everywhere. There's no change in autonomy per program. It's very standard and very GME directed. So if you ask a question that shows your deficits in knowledge, it tells me that you're probably not putting the work. Now, there's no harm in doing that. It's just that I could have a wrong formed opinion about you. So you want to stay away from questions that have an answer before coming for your program. So questions on the website, questions on the GME residency rules, those questions should not be asked at all. Moving on to the most important part is, how do you research a program in under 20 minutes? Well, the first thing you want to do is go to their website. Now, in the website, you're looking for a couple of things that are standard. You're looking at the curriculum, you're looking at the call schedule or the block schedule, you're looking at the rotations, you're looking at the model. What kind of clinic do they go to? Is the clinic in the same building? Is it in the same location with the program? Is it far from, is it downtown? Some programs have multiple clinics. You also want to take that into account because you can ask specific questions by those models. So look at the kind of clinic they have. So when I mean clinic, I mean outpatient clinic, right? Then you also want to look at the way they evaluate the residents. It's usually standard across programs. Just get an idea. And one of the reasons you want to do this is, one, you have specific questions, but also there are questions you want to avoid asking. Then, of course, you want to look at their learning goals. Most programs have the expected goals of residents on the website. You also want to look at their resources for learning, resources for research, and resources for scholarly activities. Most programs have that on their websites. Some say they give $1,000 to help you with your research and conference attendance. So you shouldn't ask that. Just, you can see that on the website and it's already there. Even the only one that I would say that you should ask, the only one that I would say to ask is the visa. And the reason why I'm saying this is, when I was interviewing, a couple of programs had H1B on their website, but honestly, they had changed their rules and that information on the website was no longer updated. I asked, but I specifically asked the program coordinator and I was able to get updated information. And the way I asked it was, I just wanted to find out about this information. The website has not been updated in the last 2 years. I just want to make sure that that information is still as it is, so that the program coordinator knows that I know about the information on the website. I'm just trying to double check to make sure that this stuff that I'm seeing on the website is up to date. And honestly, there are 2 programs that had stopped taking a H1B, but showed on the website they were taking H1B. So that was a key piece of information that I needed to know, and that affected my rank list. We'll talk about rank list in another video. Anyways, so you've spent about 5 minutes on their website, right? The next place I want you to go to is their social media. Now, social media is a very important part of residency. Most programs have a social media handle, maybe Twitter, maybe Instagram, maybe any form. Try and find it. For me, when I was in residency, not having a social media handle was kind of bothersome, because we were at the height of pandemic and it was difficult to tell camaraderie. But yeah, you could find out key information from going to their websites. Sorry, from going to their social media pages. When you're on a social media page, the thing you're looking for on a social media page is what are they doing for retreats? What are they doing for get together? How often do they get together? What were the highlights? Some programs do faculty highlights. They talk about some very personalized details about their attendings, their residents in their posts. So you could look at those things and you could get a sense of the work culture. That helps you. You can also have a sense of their identity as a program. One of the important part of this is if you have the chance to speak with any resident that's in that program, or if you have the chance to speak with any alumni, someone who graduated from there, you should do that. Even if it's just 3-5 minutes, you just want to ask them specific questions. Now, those people, you can ask them questions. What are the strengths of the program? How do you feel about the program? What are your advice on how I should go about presenting my best self to align with the program's goals? And they will give you information that you can now ask on interview day and use that as your landing spot. And now, let's talk about the most important part of this video. And this is asking the questions, the kind of specific questions we want to ask. Now, I'm going to go through the number of questions and as much as I can, but what I want you to take out of this video is that when you ask a question, you want to have two parts. The first part is the backstory, and then the second part is the main question. Now, what is a backstory? A backstory is that one sentence that you say before the question. That the purpose of this one line is to tell your interviewer that one, you have done your research, and two, the purpose of this question, because some questions might be vague. Now, no matter how you ask the question, even if it is a regular question that everybody's asking, when you approach it like this, you have a high chance of being remembered. You have a high chance of coming across like someone who's mature and who knows what they're doing. Do not fall in the trap of, they say, do you have a question for me? You say, yes, I was thinking about XYZ, XYZ. No, that sounds like you just memorized that question. So let me give you an example. Question number one, I went through all your past graduates and I realized that over 70% of them take on roles as primary care physicians. And I understand that ACGME, the robustness of primary care tutoring in the ACGME categorical internal medicine is not as strong. So my question is, are there any additions? What are the things that the program has done in the last few years to help the residents feel prepared for primary care positions on day one? And you see, this question is very wordy and very lengthy. But what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to give you a context of what I've done before arriving at this question. I'm trying to tell you that, oh, I've gone through the data and I've seen that in the last few years, your residents have graduated and they've gone on to do primary care. What's the curriculum like? Because I understand that regular ACGME 3 years internal medicine does not prepare people well enough for primary care. That's why you have special roles for what they call primary care track. Those people are trained differently for that kind of role. Another thing you need to know is it's likely that you only have a chance to ask one question, right? So what I want to advise you is prepare as much questions as you have, but there's a high chance you're going to ask only one question. Now, when you go for an interview, they will talk about program orientation. They'll give you some presentations, and those presentations might answer some of your questions. If they answer those questions, do not ask them again. Choose other questions in your bucket list. Question number two, I was looking at the residents' testimonials on Twitter, and one of the things that was always recurrent was that the residents mentioned that there was always support. So I'm just curious, how do you balance that support from PGY1, PGY2, and PGY3? How is this program able to juggle this kind of support? Because I understand that might be very intentional and tedious workflow. I noticed that there was a change in the curriculum in 2022 and 2023. I'm just curious to find out what were the motivational factors or feedback that led to this change. And just going through the program's residents and faculty, I noticed that most of the residents, they publish in a variety of specialty. That is quite interesting. That tells me that there must be a lot of support. Just curious to find out how you manage the clinical aspects versus research mentorship in residency program. I was looking through the residency comments on Instagram, and one thing that was very peculiar was they had mentioned that the program leadership are very quick to act on their feedback. And so that was very interesting. And I guess my question is, how do you determine what feedback goes up to system level of change and what feedback doesn't, or at least what feedback needs change right now or implementation right now and which feedback doesn't? I had the chance to look at the previous graduating classes. There's a couple of classes I had looked through, about 5 classes, and I was just quite curious. When the residents graduate and they leave, what's the feedback that they give to the program? What are the things that they have talked about just as a feedback while they have gone on to take other roles? One of the strengths that I think this program has, I was looking at the numbers, especially the ED visits. There's a huge variety of patients and there's a huge burden of patients that need attention of the physicians, which I think is a very great teaching experience for the residents. I'm just curious to find out, how are you able to have the attending dedicate time to teach the residents? Because my understanding is that outside of clinical duties, attendings can also be weighed down by lots of paperwork. How do you help the attendants find that balance so that they can have dedicated time to teach the residents? I saw on the website about the QI design, and that was really interesting. Because I personally have had experience with QI, but one of the things that stood out to me was how does the program teach residents to think in a QI way? Because about QI is a little bit different than thinking about individual research, patient-centered research. The QI is more of a workflow system kind of approach. What are the ways that we try to elevate the residents' knowledge concerning quality QI? I saw that your program enforces professionalism and communications as part of their core values. I'm just curious to find out how you reinforce this in day-to-day expectations of the residents. Looking through the websites and looking through the residents' schedule, I kind of understood that residents rotate in different hospitals, which is quite interesting, and I'm sure that they must have a lot of diverse exposure. But what I'm curious to find out is how do you ensure that there's equitable exposure to these complex patients? Now, these questions are very great questions to ask the program director. Try to ask us 1 to 2 questions. Don't ask more than that because most people are in a hurry. Respect their time. But that's, like I said, is for the program director. Now, don't also make the mistake of asking the wrong person the wrong question. The question for the program director is not the question for the program coordinator. It's not the question for the faculty. And the question for the residents or chief residents are not the questions you're going to ask the program director. For example, you don't want to ask the program director about visa. You can ask the program coordinator, but not the program director. So do not ask for visa on the wrong person. Program coordinator or could ask the residents. So now we've talked about program director questions. The next question you want to ask, very important one, is the faculties, because most people get interviewed by either the program director or the faculty or both. So you want to have questions for the program director. You also want to have questions for the program faculty. You also want to have questions for the residents or chief residents. You want to show them enthusiasm. You don't want to be the guy that goes into an interview not having a question. And this is very important. The reason why this is important is because not only the program director makes the decision to rank you. Everybody that interviews you has a score sheet. In that score sheet, they're able to tick the scores based on so many things. They have score sheets, and every single person scores you. So you have to be able to do well on each person interview. Even if you did well on the program director's interview, doesn't automatically mean that you get ranked high. Nope, that doesn't work that way. So the next person is faculty, and here you have to try and be specific if you can. Most programs send you an email telling you who you're going to interview with before your interview day, so you have some time to do some research on those people, right? So first question, I just wanted to say that most residents say on Twitter that your rounds are very team-oriented. I just wanted to find out, in your opinion, what do the strong residents, what the residents who you think are fantastic residents and fantastic doctors, what do they do on your round that sets them up for success? So that's a very specific question you're asking to a faculty. I kind of noticed that your team, patients you see are high acuity patients, and a lot of interns who are on your team always talk about how they come across high acuity patients on your service. So I'm just curious to find out from your opinion, what do you think are the clinical acumen and that these interns develop rapidly just because of that kind of exposure? I saw that your team is in charge of rapid response in the hospital, and I was just curious to find out how you prepare your interns for that overwhelming experience. How are you? What is there a curriculum? Is there a specific kind of talk? Now, this question might be on the website, right? This question might be on the website, but you could phrase it in a way that is speaking specifically to the person, especially if that person cares about rapid response or something that they care about deeply. You can still ask them, but from a different angle. Understand that if they care about it, it's not off limits. You can still ask. I spoke with some of the residents, and they had told me that your teaching frameworks at the bedside are really, really fantastic. I'm just curious to find out: do you have personally developed frameworks that you use, and how have you built them over the last few years? Most of the questions you've answered. The only question, I had interacted with some residents, and they told me that your service is very busy, and so I'm just really curious to find out how you're able to see so many patients and deliver so much care and still maintain that high level of quality. What's the things that you want to teach residents for them to learn to be able to carry out this kind of patient care? When you're asking these questions, you could say something like, oh, most of the questions that I have about the program have been answered. And then you go on to ask personal questions that concerns the attending themselves. If you don't have any specific question about the program, you can ask them specific questions about themselves. Why does this work? This works because, one, it tells them that you're interested in what they have to say. And then two, most times we truly don't have questions about the program because most questions have been answered, and most of us don't even mind. We want to match. So you don't have any problem with the questions, right? You don't have any questions really. But you can ask interesting questions and be interested in their answers because you're just finding out something that you cannot find out anywhere. So I would encourage you to try and ask it in this way. If you don't want to ask program questions, just ask them direct questions and ask them questions that they care about. Okay, now we've asked the faculties. The faculties, they've graded you. Your score is looking good. The next person you want to go to, the residents, the chief residents, they are very important. And let me tell you why. Now, as a chief resident, when I was interviewing applicants, we didn't formally score anybody. Nope, we did not. However, we could say that these two residents or these two applicants, they gave us some kind of vibes. We should not rank these people. Ladies and gentlemen, you will not be ranked. And when I say that you gave off Red flag. What do I mean by that? Now that's going to be a whole video. But when I'm asking or interacting with a group of residents, let's say 5 residents, and I have 3 people who are very active asking questions back and forth, then there are 2 people who are just completely somewhere else. Some of them have turned off their camera, some of them are probably talking to someone else in the background. That is a red flag. You will not be ranked for sure. Because, except of course you say, oh, I have to go do something, I need to do stuff, or something's happening in the background, except you give a reason for why you have to be of that conversation, then there's no problem. But if you signal in a way that you are not interested, or you have something else to do that is better than being in this interview, that may be perceived as red flag. Now, after talking with the faculty and asking them intelligent questions, the next question you want to ask is questions for the residents or the chief resident. And I told you, they don't score you, but they have the power to tell the program that this person has a red flag, do not rank, or at least let's flag this person. He came off as uninterested. So you also want to be interested. Now, for the residents, there's no real, you could ask almost all questions, there's no off limits, honestly. You could ask them about housing, rent, you could ask them about research, mentorship. There's no real off limits for residents. They are very happy to answer the question. You could ask them about call schedule and stuff like that. Doesn't matter. They're happy to answer those questions. The only problem with that is that you may not stand out, which is fine. As long as you don't give a red flag for residents, you don't have to stand out for real. But if you do stand out, the residents can tell the program director or program coordinator, there is this one guy that really stood out, was really fantastic. And I think I had that experience when I was in residency. There was this guy, he was from Sudan, very smart guy, asking very intelligent questions. I was like, oh my goodness. I told my program, I was like, nah, we have to have this guy. This guy is like super, super smart. You could make that impression on a resident or chief resident. It's a plus. It's no negatives. So, a couple of questions you could ask them. And again, like I said, always use the backstory technique. I spoke with some interns and they had told me that the first 2 weeks is very overwhelming. And so the question I was going to ask is, just looking back, in your particular story, what are the things that you wish you had known in the first few weeks that would have prepared you better? And the reason why this works and is more unique is that when you ask people questions that they tell you about themselves, people enjoy talking about themselves. And when they are able to tell you about themselves, you can bring out some memories from them and they associate that memory with you and you are easy to remember. So you want to approach questions as much as you can in a story-based format. So let them tell you their story. That's the idea. So next question, just looking through the rotations you had in your whole experience in residency, which of the rotations would you say has really given you the most growth since starting residency? Now, spoiler alert, this is probably going to be the MICU, the critical care, ICU. Mostly for most people, if you want to have a follow-up question, you could definitely have that. But just so you know, if you are asking question for most people training, it's going to be by far the ICU. Whatever kind of ICU, if it's cardiac ICU, medical ICU, surgical ICU, any kind of ICU, always deals with residents every single day, every single time. And it's also going to deal with you. So just welcome. Another thing that I always get, when I'm speaking with my friends, I realize that they always talk about time management and efficiency. How are you trying to work on teaching the interns time management and efficiency with their work and how to see patients? Now, that question you can actually ask the residents, you can also ask the attending, you can also ask the program director. That question cuts across every single person. But I think asking the senior resident is more appropriate just because they are the ones that truly work hand in hand, side by side with the interns. And you could ask it anyway. You could say, how are you working on your own efficiency? You could ask it, interns efficiency, it doesn't matter. I also noticed that most residents, they have a lot of publications and most of them publish very early, most of them in the first year. I'm just curious to find out, is there any specific research mentorship program or we are able to just get our mentors randomly? You can also mention for the follow-up to that question, I said, tell me the rotation that shaped you as a resident. I told you they will say is the ICU. That's fine. Then you can ask them as a follow-up. You say, and so how do you prepare the interns for this block? Is there any specific preparation or boot camp for the preparation specifically dedicated to the ICU? Now, a few programs have boot camps, but the boot camps are usually general topics. It is kind of difficult to have a boot camp for the ICU. And even if you have boot camp for the ICU, you don't get level of urgency until you're in the ICU. So it's kind of difficult to prepare for the ICU until you're in the ICU. And specifically for the chief residents, you could ask them questions that leans into their role. Questions specifically like, what are the avenues for you to advocate for residents and interns? Or what is one part of your role as a chief resident that you didn't see coming before assuming the office? Something very specific to their role. I put a link in the comment section for you to download all these questions and more questions. The idea is to go on their website, gather this information, and then ask it in a way that will come off as someone who has put in the work. Now, for those of you who have less than 18 interviews, if you have less than 18 to 15 interviews this season, make sure you watch the next video, because in the next video, I tell you detail of how you're going to write your letter of interest and ensure that it gets read, gets reviewed, and gets replied. For those of you who have questions, leave the question in the comment section. I'm going to answer your questions. And like I said, there's a link to download the questions, the link to download the checklist to interviews. I'm also doing a series of interviews with program directors, program coordinators. If you have any specific questions you want me to ask them concerning interviews, concerning ranking, concerning anything, just leave a comment in the comment section. Good luck in the match. And as usual, I'll see you in another one.